The private plane disappeared somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. No debris was ever found. No bodies were ever recovered. Your brother, along with 3 other passengers, simply vanished into the endless blue. Just like that, on an ordinary Tuesday, life as you knew it ended. How does someone just disappear from the face of the earth? How does a family continue breathing when one of its members is suddenly erased? 20 years of grief. 20 years of unanswered questions, 20 years of a hollowness that never quite filled, until that night when you saw his face staring back at you from a stranger's social media profile. The impossible had happened. He was alive. He had always been alive, and he had never wanted to come back. The waves of denial crashed against the shores of your memory. It couldn't be him. It couldn't be your brother. The man who taught you to ride a bike, the man who walked you down the aisle when your father couldn't, the man whose children had grown up without him, the man whose wife had finally moved on after 15 years of paralyzing grief. But there he was, smiling under a different name in a different country, with different people who called him family. The truth was a knife twisting in your chest. There was no plane crash. There was only a man who wanted to disappear. A man who chose to let you all believe he was dead, rather than stay. Would you have waited this long if you'd known he wasn't at the bottom of the ocean? Would you have held on to hope if you'd known it was all a lie? When does grief become betrayal? When does loss become abandonment? It was too late for those questions now. Far too late. The day before the crash, you had lunch together. You remember the way he kept checking his watch, the strange intensity in his eyes when he hugged you goodbye. "Take care of Mom," he said. You thought it was just another business trip. You didn't know it was the last time you'd see him. You didn't know he had already said his goodbyes. You didn't know he was already gone. The call came at 3:27 a.m. Your sister-in-law's voice was unrecognizable, shattered into 1,000 pieces. "The plane," she kept saying, "the plane is missing." You sat up in bed, your husband stirring beside you, the world suddenly tilting on its axis. "What plane?" you asked, still half asleep, still in a world where your brother existed. "James's plane. They can't find it. They can't find him." The Coast Guard searched for 17 days. 17 days of hope dwindling like a candle burning down to nothing. 17 days of your mother clutching his photograph, whispering prayers that disappeared into the void. 17 days before they called off the search and declared him presumed dead. His children were 7 and 10. Old enough to understand that Daddy wasn't coming home, but not old enough to understand why the universe would take him away. Your niece stopped speaking for 3 months. Your nephew developed a fear of water so severe he couldn't even take a bath without screaming. Their mother moved through life like a ghost, transparent and barely there. And you became the glue that held the broken pieces together. You stepped in. You showed up. You carried the weight of everyone's grief alongside your own. How could he have done this to his children? How could he have watched from afar as his son graduated high school, as his daughter went to prom, as birthdays and Christmases passed without him? Was freedom worth that price? Was escape worth all those tears? These questions haunted you now, 20 years later, as you stared at the undeniable truth on your computer screen. He was alive. He had always been alive. The memorial service was held on a cloudy day in April. The empty casket felt like the cruelest joke. People stood up and shared memories of James. His college roommate talked about his brilliant mind. His business partner spoke of his integrity. His wife could barely make it through her eulogy, collapsing into sobs that echoed through the silent church. You spoke last, telling the story of how he'd taught you to be brave when you were children. How he'd faced life with unflinching courage. If only you had known the truth. If only you had known the courage was actually cowardice in disguise. Every year, on the anniversary of the crash, your family gathered at the beach. Your mother would bring white roses, one for each year he'd been gone, and cast them into the waves. "So he knows we remember," she'd say, tears streaming down her face. So he knows we're still waiting. But he wasn't in the water. He wasn't waiting to be remembered. He was building a new life, creating new memories, celebrating new anniversaries. While you were drowning in grief, he was breathing free air. While you were haunted by his absence, he was happily present elsewhere. The betrayal cut deeper than the loss ever had. Your mother never recovered from losing him. How could she? He was her firstborn, her golden child, the son who could do no wrong. She kept his room exactly as he'd left it, like a shrine to a life interrupted. Every Christmas, she hung his stocking. Every birthday, she bought a gift he would never open. When she developed cancer 5 years after his death, the doctors said her body was simply too weak to fight. But you knew it wasn't her body that had given up. It was her heart. She died believing her son had preceded her to heaven. She died with his name on her lips. What would she say if she knew the truth? What would she feel knowing he could have been by her side, but chose not to be? There were signs, of course. There are always signs when you look back with the cruel clarity of hindsight. The large withdrawals from his bank account in the weeks leading up to the trip, the updated will he suddenly insisted on completing, the strange, almost peaceful resignation in his eyes at family gatherings, the way he spent extra time with each of his children the weekend before, taking them individually to their favorite places. "It's important to make memories," he told your sister-in-law when she commented on his sudden sentimentality. Making memories. Or saying goodbye. What kind of man lets his family think he's dead? What kind of father abandons his children? What kind of son lets his mother die of grief? These questions pounded in your head as you clicked through his profile, each photo a fresh betrayal. There he was on a beach, tanned and smiling, his arm around a woman you didn't recognize. There he was blowing out candles on a birthday cake, surrounded by strangers who looked at him with love. There he was, living the life he apparently preferred to the one he'd had with all of you, living and breathing while you had mourned him, buried him, carried him in your broken heart for 20 years. Was it so terrible, the life he had? Was the pressure of success, of family, of responsibility so crushing that disappearing seemed the only escape? You thought of his beautiful home, his adoring wife, his healthy children. You thought of the business he'd built, the respect he'd earned, the future he'd been promised. None of it had been enough. Or perhaps it had been too much. Either way, he had chosen to leave it all behind, to sacrifice all of you for his freedom. It was a choice you couldn't comprehend, a betrayal you couldn't forgive. The night you found his profile, you didn't sleep. You sat in your dark kitchen until dawn, the blue light of your laptop illuminating your tear-stained face. You thought about calling your sister-in-law, now remarried with a life rebuilt from the ashes of abandonment. You thought about telling your niece and nephew that the father they had mourned was a lie. You thought about the ripple effect of this revelation, how it would tear open wounds that had taken decades to scab over. Would knowing he abandoned them be better or worse than believing he had died? Which truth was more bearable? Which lie more merciful? He looked older, of course. His dark hair had turned silver at the temples. Lines had formed around his eyes and mouth, but it was unmistakably him. The same crooked smile, the same small scar above his right eyebrow from when he fell out of a tree at 11. The same James, but not your James anymore. He had become someone else. Michael Williams, his profile said, living in Auckland, New Zealand, a consultant for an environmental non-profit. A world away from the investment banker he had been, the brother you had known, the father his children had lost. The questions multiplied like cells dividing. Had there even been a real flight? Had he somehow orchestrated the crash, or merely used an existing tragedy as his cover? Were the other 3 passengers real people with grieving families, or fabrications to complete his fiction? How many people had been complicit in this deception? How many people had helped him disappear while his wife screamed into her pillow at night and his children drew pictures of angels with Daddy's face? The depth of the betrayal was unfathomable, an ocean of lies too vast to navigate. It would have been easier if he had died. Death, at least, is not a choice. Death doesn't abandon you willingly. Death doesn't watch from the shadows as you suffer. Death is cruel but honest. This was something else entirely. This was a deliberate infliction of pain, a conscious decision to break the hearts of everyone who loved him. This was a man deciding his family was disposable, replaceable, forgettable. This was your brother revealing himself to be a stranger. You remember the nightmares your nephew had for years, dreams where he was drowning, calling for his father, the water filling his lungs as he screamed into the void. You remember holding him at 3 a.m, his small body shaking with sobs, whispering, "I want Daddy, I just want Daddy." What would he say now, at 27, knowing his father had been alive all along? That while he was screaming into the darkness, his father was building a new life in the sunshine. Some wounds never heal, some betrayals can never be forgiven. Your finger hovered over the message button. What would you even say? "I know you're alive. How could you? We grieved you." There were no words adequate for this moment, this realization, this shattering of everything you had believed for 2 decades. If you reached out, if you exposed his deception, you would be forcing him back into a life he had chosen to leave. But if you remained silent, you would become complicit in his lie. You would be choosing his comfort over the truth your family deserved. What was the right thing to do when all options led to more pain? The investigation after the crash had been frustratingly inconclusive. The small charter plane had disappeared from radar somewhere over the Pacific. No distress signal had been sent. No debris had ever been found. The weather had been clear, the pilot experienced. It was as if the aircraft had simply vanished into thin air. "These things happen," the Coast Guard captain had said gently, as if that explained how 4 people could disappear without a trace. The ocean is vast. Sometimes it doesn't give up its secrets. But the ocean had held no secrets. The secret had been walking around, breathing, living, choosing every day not to come home. It was too late for him to come back now. Too late to reclaim the father role he had abdicated. Too late to be the son who should have been by his mother's deathbed. Too late to be the brother you had needed during the darkest days of your life. 20 years, too late for all of it. His children were adults now. His wife had found love again. His mother was gone. You had learned to live without him. He had made his choice, and you had all paid the price. There was no going back. There was only this new, terrible knowledge that would either be shared or kept as one final sacrifice on the altar of his selfishness. What would you have done in his place? If the weight of your life had become unbearable, would you have considered such a drastic escape? Would you have been capable of causing such pain to free yourself? Or would you have stayed, shouldered your responsibilities, faced your demons head-on? You'd like to think you would have chosen differently. You'd like to think you would have found another way. But the truth is, you never knew him as well as you thought you did. You never saw this capacity for cruelty, this willingness to wound. The brother you loved had been a mirage. The real man had been hidden all along. The strangest part was how happy he looked in the photos. Not just content, but joyful. As if shedding his old life, his family, his identity, had been the key to his happiness. As if all of you had been weights around his ankles, drowning him slowly. As if he could only breathe once he had cut you all away. That was the most painful realization, that he didn't seem to regret his choice, that he had flourished in his freedom while all of you had withered in his absence, that given the chance to do it over, he would likely disappear all over again. Your niece never wore white after the memorial service. "It's the color of goodbye," she said when you asked her about it years later. "It's the color of things that don't come back." She grew up with a shadow where her father should have been. She walked herself down the aisle at her wedding, refusing her stepfather's offer. "I've already lost one father," she explained. "I don't want to pretend I have another." At the reception, she danced alone during the father-daughter dance, her arms wrapped around herself, swaying to a song that made everyone cry. If she knew he was alive, would the pain be easier to bear, or impossibly heavier? Your sister-in-law spent 3 years in a fog of grief. She went through the motions of motherhood, of survival, but her eyes remained vacant, fixed on some middle distance where perhaps she could still see him. She slept on the couch because the bed they had shared felt too empty. She kept his voicemail saved on her phone until the technology became obsolete and she had to let them go. Another small death. When she finally met someone new, she confessed to you that she felt like she was having an affair. "How can I love someone else when I'm still his wife?" she had asked, tears streaming down her face. "How do I stop being the widow of a man who isn't coming home?" But he wasn't coming home because he didn't want to, not because he couldn't. The profile had been tagged in another user's vacation photos. That's how you had stumbled upon it, through the random algorithm of connection, the digital web that now tied the world together. You hadn't been looking for him. You hadn't been thinking about him that day. You had long ago stopped actively grieving, had relegated his memory to a quiet corner of your heart that only ached on special occasions. But there he was suddenly, laughing on a boat, the Sydney Opera House visible in the background. A ghost made flesh through pixels and data, a dead man living a second life while his first one lay in ruins behind him. The not knowing had been its own special torture. The lack of a body meant a lack of closure. There was always that tiny, irrational hope that perhaps he had survived somehow. Perhaps he had washed up on a remote island with amnesia. Perhaps he had been rescued by a passing ship that didn't have communications. Perhaps. Your sister-in-law had clung to those possibilities longer than the rest of you, refusing to have him declared legally dead until 7 years had passed. 7 years of limbo, of being neither wife nor widow. 7 years of telling her children that Daddy might still come home. If she had known the truth, would those years have been easier or harder to bear? You think about your mother now, about how she died believing she would see her son again in heaven. Was there comfort in that belief, false though it was? Or was it the cruelest part of all, that even her faith had been twisted into another lie? She had prayed every night for God to take care of her boy until they were reunited. But he hadn't needed divine care. He had been taking care of himself, crafting a new life, while she withered away in the shell of her old one. Some lies are unforgivable, not because of their audacity, but because of their consequences. This lie had killed your mother as surely as if he had placed a pillow over her face. His new name, Michael Williams, was so ordinary, so forgettable. Had he chosen it for that reason? To blend in, to disappear into the background noise of life? Or had there been some meaning behind it, some clue he had left for anyone clever enough to look? You searched your memory for any connection, any hint that might make sense of this choice. Michael had been your grandfather's name, your mother's father who died before James was born. Williams was common enough to be coincidence, but was it? Or had he wanted, even in his deception, to maintain some thread of connection to his past? The thought made you even angrier. He didn't deserve to keep anything from the life he had so callously discarded. The profile didn't have much public information, just the name, location, and a handful of tagged photos. But it was enough. Enough to confirm that the brother you had mourned was a lie. Enough to know that the grief you had carried for 20 years had been unnecessary. Enough to understand that while you had been living in the shadow of tragedy, he had been basking in the light of a new beginning. The inequity of it burned like acid in your throat. You had suffered while he had thrived. You had remained faithful while he had betrayed. You had carried the weight while he had walked away unburdened. What now? What does a person do with such knowledge? Do you reach out and confront him, force him to face the devastation he left behind? Do you tell the others, share the burden of this terrible truth? Or do you carry it alone, one more weight added to the stack you've been bearing for 2 decades? There are no guidelines for this situation, no self-help books titled, "When Your Dead Brother Isn't Actually Dead." You are in uncharted territory, mapping the geography of betrayal with each painful realization, each impossible decision. The anger comes in waves, overwhelming and then receding, leaving you gasping in its wake. Anger at him for his deception. Anger at yourself for not seeing the signs. Anger at the world for allowing such cruelty to go unpunished. But beneath the anger is something worse, something more painful. The realization that the brother you loved, the brother you grieved, never truly existed. He was a role being played by a man capable of inflicting unimaginable pain on those who loved him most. The person you had cherished was a fiction, and that meant that your grief, your decades of pain, had been wasted on a ghost. Would you have done anything differently if you had known? Would you have spent less time comforting your sister-in-law, less energy helping to raise his children, fewer hours by your mother's bedside as cancer consumed her? Would you have moved on more quickly, relegated him to the status of villain rather than victim? Or would you have spent those 20 years searching for him, determined to drag him back to face the mess he'd left behind? It doesn't matter now. Those years are gone, spent in service to a lie so enormous it had shaped the entire landscape of your family's existence. His son, your nephew, joined the Coast Guard after college. "I want to find people who are lost," he explained when you asked about his choice. "I want to bring them home to their families." The irony of it threatens to choke you now. All those years of training, of search and rescue missions, of pulling people from the merciless sea, and his own father had never been lost at all, had never needed rescuing, had chosen to stay away while his son devoted his life to making sure no other family felt the pain of a loved one missing at sea. The waste of it all, the pointless suffering, the lives shaped around an absence that had been a presence elsewhere all along. You've always wondered about his final moments, if he had been afraid as the plane went down, if he had thought of his family in those last seconds, if he had regretted any part of his life as death approached. Now you know there were no final moments, no fear, no regrets, just calculation, just deception. Just a man walking away from his life as easily as one might walk away from a restaurant after a disappointing meal. No, not even that. A disappointing meal is accidental. This was deliberate cruelty disguised as tragedy, planned abandonment hidden behind presumed death. There had been an insurance policy, of course, $2 million that his wife had used to pay off their mortgage, to establish college funds for the children, to rebuild some semblance of security in a world suddenly rendered insecure. Blood money, you realize now. The price he had placed on his absence. The cost of his freedom paid in a lump sum to ease his conscience. Had he thought that money would make up for the loss? That financial stability would somehow compensate for the emotional devastation? Or had it simply been one more practical consideration, one more loose end to tie up before he vanished into his new life? Your hand trembles as you finally click on the message button. What right did he have to peace when he had stolen it from all of you? What right did he have to build a new life when he had destroyed his old one so completely? The cursor blinks in the empty message field, waiting for words that could never be adequate. What do you say to a ghost? What do you say to the architect of your family's greatest pain? In the end, you type just 5 words. "I know you're alive, James." Send. There's no going back now, for either of you. The wait is excruciating. Minutes stretch into hours. You check the message repeatedly, seeing that it has been delivered but not yet read. Is he asleep? Working? Or has he seen the notification and is now frantically trying to decide what to do? Is he scared? Remorseful? Or simply annoyed that his carefully constructed fiction has finally unraveled? You imagine him pacing, panicking, perhaps even preparing to disappear again. A new name, a new country, a new life. He's done it once. He could do it again. But this time, you won't let him vanish without consequences. This time, you have the power to expose the truth. Then it happens. Seen. The message has been read. Your heart pounds so hard you can feel it in your fingertips, see it pulsing at the edge of your vision. What will he do? Will he deny it, block you, disappear again? Or will he finally, after 20 years, offer some explanation for the inexplicable? The 3 dots appear. He's typing, stopping, typing again. A response is being crafted, deleted, rewritten. What words could possibly bridge this chasm? What explanation could ever be enough? The dots disappear, then reappear. Your breath catches in your throat, and then finally his reply arrives. I never meant to hurt anyone. 5 words for 20 years of pain. 5 words as if they could possibly be adequate. 5 words that ignite your fury anew. Your fingers fly across the keyboard, years of unspoken rage pouring out in a torrent of accusation. You tell him about your mother's slow decline, about his children's nightmares, about his wife's hollowed-out existence. You tell him about the memorial service, the annual beach ritual, the birthdays marked by his absence. You tell him everything he missed, everything he caused, every moment of suffering his freedom had purchased. You don't hold back, you don't soften the blow. He wanted the truth of his actions hidden. You force him to face it head-on. When you finish, you're shaking, tears streaming down your face, 20 years of grief transformed into white-hot anger. His response is slower this time. The dots appear and disappear for what feels like an eternity. When his message finally comes through, it's longer, a paragraph that you have to steel yourself to read. I was drowning, he writes. Not in the ocean, but in my life. The expectations, the pressure, the constant feeling that I was living someone else's dream. I couldn't see any way out that wouldn't destroy everyone around me. So I took the only exit I could find. I know it was selfish. I know it caused pain. But I truly believed everyone would be better off eventually without me than with the person I was becoming. I was wrong, I see that now, but it's too late to go back. Too late to fix what I broke. All I can say is that I'm sorry, though I know that changes nothing. Sorry. Such a small word for such an enormous transgression. Sorry for letting you think he was dead. Sorry for allowing his children to grow up fatherless. Sorry for watching from afar as your mother withered away from grief. Sorry doesn't begin to cover it. Sorry doesn't even scratch the surface. You want to reach through the screen and shake him, make him feel a fraction of the pain he has caused. But all you can do is type more words that will never be enough, never convey the depth of the betrayal, the breadth of the suffering, the complete restructuring of lives around an absence that was a lie. What do you want me to do? He asks, after absorbing your fury. Should I reach out to them? Should I come back? Or would that just cause more pain now? The audacity of these questions takes your breath away. Now he wants your guidance. Now he cares about causing pain, after 20 years of silence, of allowing all of you to believe he was rotting at the bottom of the ocean. The decision isn't yours to make. It belongs to his wife, to his children, to the people whose lives were most profoundly shattered by his disappearance. But they don't even know there's a decision to be made. They're still living in the world where James died in a plane crash. Only you have crossed over into this new, terrible reality. It's too late now. Too late for him to be a father to children who are now adults. Too late for him to be a husband to a wife who has built a new life. Too late for him to be a son to a mother who died calling his name. Too late for all of it. That's the cruelest part of what he's done. He's robbed everyone, not just of his presence, but of the possibility of reconciliation, of closure, of the truth. 20 years too late for anything but more pain. The revelation now would only serve to transform grief into betrayal, to replace the pain of loss with the pain of deception. Is that better or worse? Is truth always preferable to comforting lies? They deserve to know the truth, you finally write, not for you, not to ease your conscience or grant you forgiveness you haven't earned, but for them. So they can understand that they didn't do anything wrong, that there was nothing they could have done differently, that it was all your choice, your cowardice, your selfishness. The words are harsh, but necessary. He doesn't get to control the narrative anymore. He doesn't get to decide who knows what or when. He gave up that right when he chose to disappear, to let all of you believe he was dead while he built a new life from the ashes of his old one. The silence stretches between you, digital and vast. You imagine him on the other side of the world, confronted with the consequences of his actions in a way he's managed to avoid for 20 years. Is he feeling remorse, regret, or just inconvenience at being discovered, at having his carefully constructed facade threatened? Does he lie awake at night, thinking of the children who grew up without him? Does he mark the passage of birthdays, graduations, weddings he chose to miss? Or has he managed to compartmentalize so completely that his old life feels like someone else's memory, a book he once read but no longer remembers clearly? "I'll tell them," he finally responds. "Not right away. I need to prepare, figure out what to say. But you're right. They deserve the truth, whatever they choose to do with it." You don't believe him. Why would you? This is a man who orchestrated his own death, who maintained a 20-year deception. His words mean nothing. His promises are empty. He will disappear again, change his name again, start over again, rather than face the music of his actions. You've forced him into a corner, and cornered animals either fight or flee. You know which one he'll choose. He's already proven himself a runner. You save screenshots of everything. His profile, your conversation, the evidence of his existence, his betrayal, his lies. If he disappears again, you'll have proof. If he denies everything, you'll have receipts. This truth won't be buried again, won't be lost at sea, won't vanish without a trace. You've dragged it into the light, and there it will stay, exposed and undeniable. Let him run if he wants to. The truth will follow him now, dogging his steps, breathing down his neck. There's nowhere far enough to escape it anymore. "I have proof," you tell him. "Screenshots, your profile, this conversation. If you disappear again, if you don't tell them, I will. I've carried the weight of your death for 20 years. I won't carry the weight of your lies anymore." It's an ultimatum, clear and non-negotiable. The ball is in his court now. He can do the right thing, finally, belatedly, or you will do it for him. Either way, the days of his comfortable deception are over. Either way, the truth will find the light. It's just a matter of who delivers it and how. The weight lifts slightly from your shoulders as you close the laptop. For 20 years, you've been the keeper of a grave that was never filled, the mourner of a man who never died. Now, at least, you know the truth. It's an ugly truth, a painful truth, but it's real in a way that your grief never was. There's power in that reality, in that knowledge. For the first time in 20 years, you're standing on solid ground. The question now is what to build on that foundation. More secrets and lies, or something honest, however painful that honesty might be. You think about your niece and nephew, about how this revelation will transform their understanding, not just of their father, but of themselves. They've built identities as the children of a man who died, who was taken from them. How will they reconstruct themselves as the children of a man who chose to leave, who found them so easy to abandon? Will it be easier or harder to integrate this new narrative into their sense of self? Will it heal old wounds or create new ones too deep to ever truly close? There are no answers to these questions, only the certainty that the truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. Once this door is opened, it can never be closed again. His wife, no, his ex-wife, though not by choice or legal declaration, has finally found happiness. After 15 years of half-living, of raising children alone, of waking up to his absence every morning, she met someone who helped her remember what joy felt like. They've been married for 5 years now. She smiles easily again, laughs without restraint. Will this revelation shatter that hard-won peace? Will it send her spiraling back into the darkness she spent so many years climbing out of? Is the truth worth the cost of her happiness? These questions have no simple answers, no clear moral imperative. There is only the impossible choice between continued deception and devastating honesty. The days pass in a fog of anticipation and dread. You check your messages compulsively, waiting for some indication of his decision. Will he keep his word? Will he tell them himself? Or will the responsibility fall to you, the bearer of unbearable news? You go through the motions of your daily life, working, eating, sleeping, but underneath it all is the constant hum of this new reality, this knowledge that has changed everything and nothing all at once. He's alive. He's been alive all along, and soon everyone will know. A week later, your phone rings. It's your sister-in-law, her voice strange, distant, as if she's calling from the bottom of a well. "Can you come over?" she asks, the words barely audible. "Right away, please." You know immediately. He's told her, or tried to. You grab your keys, your heart pounding so hard you can hear the blood rushing in your ears. This is it. The moment when the lie finally shatters, when the carefully maintained fiction of the past 20 years gives way to the cruel truth. The moment when grief transforms into something else entirely, something without a name, but with teeth and claws that will tear at all of you from the inside out. When you arrive, she's sitting on the couch, her face blank, a printed email in her trembling hands. Her husband is beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "He's alive," she says, as soon as you enter, her voice flat, emotionless. "James is alive. He's been alive this whole time. He left us. He chose to leave us." The words hang in the air, impossible and undeniable. You sit beside her, take her free hand in yours. There's nothing to say, no comfort to offer, no explanation that will make sense of the senseless. There is only presence, only solidarity in the face of this shared betrayal. The email is long, detailed, full of explanations that explain nothing, apologies that apologize for nothing. He tells the story of a man trapped, desperate, seeing no way out but the most extreme escape. He talks about depression, about feeling like a fraud in his own life, about the crushing pressure of expectations he felt he could never meet. He speaks of the elaborate plan, the chartered plane that never took off, the falsified passenger list, the carefully constructed paper trail leading to an ocean grave. He confesses to watching from afar as they grieved, as they rebuilt their lives around his absence. He begs for understanding, if not forgiveness. He says he's ready to face the consequences, to answer their questions, to attempt to make amends if they're willing. Your niece and nephew are on their way, summoned by their mother's cryptic call, unaware that their world is about to shift on its axis once again. How do you prepare someone for news like this? How do you cushion the blow of learning that the tragedy that shaped their childhood was actually an abandonment? That the father they mourned had been living and breathing and choosing not to come back every single day for 20 years? There are no words adequate for this moment, no script to follow, no guidebook for navigating the aftermath of a resurrection that was never a death to begin with. They arrive together, brother and sister, now adults with lives of their own. They sense immediately that something is terribly wrong, their expressions shifting from concern to alarm as they take in their mother's face, your presence, the heaviness in the room. "Sit down," their mother says, patting the couch beside her. "There's something I need to tell you, something about your father." You watch as they exchange glances, as they brace themselves for whatever new pain they're about to endure. If only you could shield them from this. If only there was a way to preserve the narrative that had, at least, the dignity of tragedy, rather than the sordid reality of abandonment. But the truth was here now, inescapable and demanding to be acknowledged. Your sister-in-law takes a deep breath, her hands still clutching the printed email like a poisonous thing she can't put down. "Your father is alive," she says, her voice breaking on the last word. "He didn't die in the crash. There was no crash. He left us. He chose to leave us." The words fall into the room like bombs, exploding in slow motion. Your nephew's face goes completely white, all blood draining away in an instant. Your niece makes a sound that isn't quite human, a wounded animal noise that comes from somewhere primal and unreachable. The moment stretches, elongates, becomes something outside of normal time as the information penetrates, as their reality reshapes itself around this impossible truth. "What are you talking about?" Your nephew finally manages, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean he's alive? How? Where? Why?" The questions tumble out, urgent and desperate, seeking answers that can never be satisfactory, explanations that can never justify. His mother hands him the email with shaking hands. "He wrote to me," she says. "Last night. He's in New Zealand. He's been there for years, living a new life." Your niece hasn't spoken, hasn't moved, seems frozen in a state of shock too profound for words or tears or anger. She stares at her mother with eyes that seem to be looking at something 1,000 miles away. You watch as they read the email together, heads bent over the pages, bodies rigid with tension. You see the exact moment when disbelief gives way to comprehension, when the impossible becomes real, when the father they thought they knew transforms into a stranger capable of unimaginable cruelty. Your nephew stands abruptly, paces the room, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, as if his body no longer remembers how to function normally. Your niece remains motionless, only the tears now streaming down her face, indicating that she's still present, still processing this earthquake of revelation. "He wants to see us," your sister-in-law says into the heavy silence. "He says he's willing to come back, to try to explain in person, to make amends, whatever that means." The laugh that escapes your nephew is harsh, devoid of humor, edged with a bitterness that wasn't there an hour ago. "Make amends," he repeats. "Make amends for letting us think he was dead for 20 years, for letting us mourn him, for making us build our entire lives around his absence?" Each question is louder than the last, his voice rising with the tide of anger now replacing shock. There's no making amends for that. There's no explanation that could ever be enough. Your niece finally moves, reaching for her brother's hand, grounding him with her touch. "I want to see him," she says, her voice small but determined. "I need to see him. I need to know he's real." The simplicity of her statement cuts through the chaos, the confusion, the swirling emotions threatening to drown all of you. Of course she needs to see him. Of course she needs tangible proof. How else to believe that the father she's mourned for 20 years has been alive all along? How else to reconcile the man who taught her to ride a bike with the man who could walk away without looking back? The next days pass in a blur of arrangements, negotiations, preparations for a reunion that feels more like a confrontation. He agrees to come to them, to face them on their terms, on their territory. A hotel is booked. A date is set. Lives are rearranged to accommodate this ghost, stepping out of the past and into the present. You watch your family steel themselves, fortify their hearts against the tsunami of emotions that threatens to overwhelm them. There is anger, yes, and betrayal, but also a horrible, treacherous hope. Hope that there will be answers, explanations, some key that unlocks the mystery of how a loving father could transform into a man capable of such calculated cruelty. The day arrives with the weight of inevitability. You sit in the hotel lobby with your sister-in-law and her children, all of you silent, tense, eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting for a man you both know intimately and don't know at all. And then he's there, standing in the doorway, scanning the lobby, older but unmistakably him. Your breath catches in your throat. There's a surreal quality to the moment, like watching a photograph come to life, a memory step out of the past and into three-dimensional reality. He sees you, hesitates, then walks toward your group with the gait of a man approaching his own execution. The reunion is painful beyond words. Your nephew stands rigid, refusing the embrace his father attempts, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Your niece collapses into sobs at the sight of him, 20 years of grief finding release in a torrent of tears. Your sister-in-law simply stares, as if trying to reconcile this older, greyer version with the husband she believed was feeding the fishes at the bottom of the ocean. The air is thick with unasked questions, with accusation, with 2 decades of absence condensed into a moment of unbearable presence. He looks older, of course, but also smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his choices, by the confrontation with their consequences. "I don't even know what to call you," your nephew says, breaking the tense silence. "Dad seems wrong for a man who chose not to be my father. James seems too familiar for a stranger. So what should I call the man who let me believe he was dead while he was building a new life on the other side of the world?" The bitterness in his voice is a living thing, sharp-edged and dangerous. The man who was once your brother flinches as if struck, unable to meet his son's gaze, to face the damage written so clearly in the young man's eyes. "Whatever you want," he says quietly. "I forfeited the right to be called your father a long time ago." You listen as he tries to explain the inexplicable, to justify the unjustifiable. He talks about feeling trapped, about the pressure of success, about the creeping dread that filled his days and the suffocating panic that haunted his nights. He speaks of a depression so profound it distorted his thinking, convinced him that his family would be better off with the clean break of his death than with the slow poison of his unhappiness. He describes the elaborate plan, the fake passenger list, the charter plane that never took off, the careful construction of a narrative that would never be questioned because the alternative was too outlandish to consider. He confesses to watching from afar as they grieved, as they rebuilt their lives around the crater of his absence. "Did you ever think about coming back?" your niece asks, her voice small, vulnerable in a way that breaks your heart all over again. "Did you ever miss us enough to want to come back?" The question hangs in the air, simple and devastating. He closes his eyes, pain etched into every line of his face. "Every day," he whispers. "I thought about coming back every single day. But the longer I stayed away, the more impossible it seemed. How could I explain? How could I expect you to forgive me?" And then years had passed, and I told myself it was too late, that you were better off with the father you had lost than with the one who had abandoned you. The words are practiced, rehearsed, but the anguish behind them seems genuine. Whether it's enough is another question entirely. Your sister-in-law has been silent, watching with eyes that see too much, that understand too well. "You could have said goodbye," she finally says, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "You could have divorced me. You could have moved across the world. You could have been honest about your unhappiness. There were 1,000 other ways, James. 1,000 choices that wouldn't have destroyed us." The simplicity of her statement cuts through his elaborate justifications, exposes the fundamental selfishness at the core of his decision. He didn't just leave, he orchestrated a fiction that denied them even the truth of their abandonment, that robbed them of the ability to be angry, to grieve properly, to move on with clear eyes. The conversation circles, retreads the same ground, finds no resolution because there can be none. Some betrayals are too profound for forgiveness, some wounds too deep for healing. Your nephew leaves abruptly, unable to bear another minute in his father's presence. Another apology that changes nothing, explains nothing, repairs nothing. Your niece stays, hungry for every moment with the father she thought was gone forever, even as she struggles to reconcile the daddy of her childhood with the man capable of such calculated cruelty. Your sister-in-law maintains a dignified distance, her days of tears for this man long since dried up, replaced by a weariness that suggests she's already moved on, already relegated him to the past where he belongs. You watch from the sidelines, witness to a tragedy of your brother's making. There will be more conversations, more attempts at explanation, more struggling to make sense of the senseless. There will be decisions about whether to reintegrate him into their lives or to send him back to the existence he chose over them. There will be telling others, extended family, friends, colleagues who sent sympathy cards and attended the memorial service. There will be legal complications, practical considerations, the messy business of resurrection after a presumed death. But for now, there is just this moment, this confrontation, this family fractured by one man's desperate, destructive choice. Later, alone in your kitchen, you think about forgiveness. Is it possible after such a betrayal? Is it even desirable? Would forgiving him be an act of healing or another form of self-harm? There are no easy answers, no clear path forward. Only the knowledge that nothing will ever be the same, that the past 20 years have been built on a foundation of lies, that the brother you thought you knew never really existed. It's a kind of death, after all, not the physical death you grieved, but the death of trust, of history, of shared reality. The person you thought your brother was has died, replaced by a stranger capable of causing unimaginable pain to the people who loved him most. But there's also this truth. He's alive. Despite everything, despite the anger and betrayal and confusion, there's a small part of you that can't help but feel grateful for that simple fact. He's alive. Your mother's firstborn didn't die in the cold depths of the Pacific. Your niece and nephew's father has been breathing the same air as them for 20 years. It doesn't excuse what he did. It doesn't minimize the damage he caused. But it's something real in a landscape of lies, something true to hold on to as everything else shifts and reforms around this new reality. He's alive, and whatever comes next, whatever choices are made about forgiveness or rejection, that fact remains unchanged, immutable, a small mercy in the midst of so much pain. Would you have rather never known? Would it have been better to continue believing the lie, to maintain the fiction of the tragic accident, the blameless death? There's no way to answer that question, no parallel universe to consult where the truth remained hidden. There is only this reality, this knowledge, this family forever altered by one man's decision to disappear and another's decision to expose his deception. There is only moving forward with open eyes, with the painful clarity that comes from seeing the truth, however ugly, however devastating. There is only the choice each of you must make now, to integrate this man back into your lives or to let him go with the full awareness of what and who you're letting go. In the weeks that follow, your family splinters along fault lines of forgiveness and rejection. Your niece, hungry for the father she lost, chooses to establish a tentative relationship, cautious and bounded but real. Your nephew maintains his distance, unable to move past the betrayal, the years of grief that now feel wasted, pointless. Your sister-in-law, long since moved on to a new life, a new love, chooses cordial disengagement, civil but distant, unwilling to reopen wounds that took years to heal. And you vacillate, torn between loyalty to those who suffered most directly and the complicated love you still feel for the brother who, despite everything, shares your blood, your history, your earliest memories. He stays in town longer than planned, renting a small apartment, trying to rebuild bridges burned beyond recognition. He visits your mother's grave, stands before the headstone engraved with words about a beloved son gone too soon, confronts the most unforgivable consequence of his deception. He was too late for her, too late for goodbyes, for explanations, for the chance to hold her hand one last time. Too late for anything but regret, bitter and useless. You find him there one day, kneeling in the damp grass, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. You should feel satisfaction at this evidence of his pain, but you feel only emptiness, a hollow space where closure should be, but isn't. What is the moral of this story? What lesson can be extracted from such senseless pain? Perhaps it's simply this. The truth, however long delayed, however carefully hidden, finds its way to the surface eventually. 20 years wasn't long enough to keep this secret buried. 20 years of elaborate deception, undone by a random social media algorithm, a chance sighting. The digital web that now connects the world in ways your brother couldn't have anticipated when he disappeared in an age before facial recognition and global connectivity. Perhaps the lesson is that no escape is ever complete, no reinvention ever total. The past follows, patient and persistent, waiting for its moment to reassert itself. Or perhaps the lesson is about choices, how a single decision can create ripples that become tsunamis, how what seems like the only option in a moment of desperation can create decades of unintended consequences. Your brother chose what he thought was the cleanest break, the quickest escape from a life that had become unbearable. But there was nothing clean about the break he made, nothing quick about the pain he caused. His choice to disappear rather than face his demons directly fractured his family beyond repair, created wounds that 20 years couldn't heal, and his reappearance only reopened. One choice, one moment, one terrible decision with 2 decades of fallout. In the end, it comes down to this: a family shattered by one man's desperate bid for freedom, trying to reassemble the pieces into something that makes sense, that allows for moving forward. There will never be complete healing. There will never be a return to what was. There is only the painful process of integration, integrating the truth with the lie, the present with the past, the father who abandoned with the father who was mourned. It's messy and incomplete and unsatisfying, like most things in life, but it's real, which is more than can be said for the 20 years of grief based on a fiction so complete it was never questioned. Your brother will never be the same person to any of you. He can never reclaim the roles he abdicated: beloved son, devoted husband, loving father. Those versions of him died the day he chose to disappear, replaced by more complex, more painful iterations. The son who let his mother die believing he preceded her in death. The husband who forced his wife to become a widow while he lived and breathed elsewhere. The father who watched from afar as his children grew up without him. These are the identities he must carry now, the consequences he must bear. The legacy of a choice that seemed like escape, but was actually a different kind of prison, a prison of secrets and lies and the constant fear of discovery. And yet, there's a strange kind of freedom in the revelation, in the end of pretense, in the confrontation with hard truth. No more secrets, no more lies, no more looking over his shoulder, fearing the past will catch up. It has caught up. It has demanded its due. It has exposed everything he tried to hide. And now at least, whatever relationships are salvaged or severed, whatever forgiveness is granted or withheld, it will be based on reality rather than fiction, on clear-eyed choice rather than deception. Perhaps that's all anyone can ask for after 20 years of living a lie, the chance to face the truth and make choices based on what's real, however painful that reality might be. The question that haunts you, that keeps you awake at night staring at the ceiling, is simple but unanswerable. Was it worth it? Was his freedom worth the price paid by those left behind? Was his new life, his escape, his reinvention worth the devastation he caused? You'll never know. Only he can answer that question, and even he might not know the truth of it. The calculus of pain versus relief, of selfishness versus self-preservation, is too complex, too personal, too wrapped up in subjective experience to ever be definitively solved. All you know is that his choice created a ripple effect of suffering that continued long after he thought he'd made a clean break, that continues still in the complicated emotions his return has unleashed. In time, the raw edges will dull, the shock will fade. This new reality will gradually become just reality. Your niece will figure out what kind of relationship she can have with the father who abandoned her. Your nephew will either find a path to forgiveness or make peace with his decision to keep his distance. Your sister-in-law will continue the life she built without her first husband, the happiness she found despite his betrayal. And you You'll continue to navigate the space between loyalty to the living and honoring the pain of the past, between the brother you loved and the stranger he revealed himself to be. There are no clean endings here, no neat resolutions, no moments where everything suddenly makes sense. Just people doing their best to move forward in the wake of a truth, long hidden but finally irrevocably exposed. Was it better to know? That question persists, unanswerable but insistent. Was the truth, however painful, preferable to the lie, however comforting? There's no consensus among your family, no unified theory of knowledge versus ignorance. Your niece, despite the shock and pain, believes it was better to know her father is alive, to have the chance to ask why, to decide for herself whether to welcome him back into her life. Your nephew maintains that he was happier believing his father died loving them than knowing he lived choosing to leave them. Your sister-in-law simply says it doesn't matter now. The truth is out, and they all have to live with it, whether they wanted it or not. As for you, you vacillate, seeing both the value of truth and the pain it has caused, the closure it has provided, and the new wounds it has opened. The story spreads as stories do. Friends, extended family, colleagues who sent sympathy cards and attended the memorial service now learn that the tragedy they mourned was actually an elaborate deception. Some are angry, feeling manipulated and foolish for their genuine grief. Others are simply stunned, unable to comprehend how someone could orchestrate such a massive lie, maintain it for so long, cause so much unnecessary pain. A few express understanding, sharing their own experiences with depression, with feeling trapped, with contemplating desperate measures to escape lives that had become unbearable. The reactions are as varied as the people themselves, reflecting their own histories, their own capacity for empathy, their own definitions of what is forgivable and what is beyond redemption. Your brother retreats in the face of this renewed scrutiny, this community judgment. He returns to New Zealand, to the life he built, the identity he created, promising to stay in touch, to be available whenever his children are ready to talk, to visit whenever they're willing to see him. You don't believe him, not because you think he's lying exactly, but because you understand something fundamental about him now. When faced with pain, with difficulty, with the messy complications of human relationships, his instinct is to run, to disappear, to recreate himself somewhere new, unburdened by the past. It's who he is. It's who he's always been. The brother you thought you knew, reliable, steadfast, present, was the fiction. This man, this runner, is the reality. Life continues in his absence, as it did for 20 years when you thought he was dead. But it's different now, colored by knowledge rather than ignorance, by truth rather than deception. Your niece still struggles with nightmares, but they've changed. No longer dreams of her father drowning, calling for help that never comes, but dreams of him walking away, choosing to leave, turning his back as she cries out for him to stay. Your nephew still avoids water, but his fear has transformed into anger, a simmering rage at the man who used the ocean as his alibi, who let his son believe the water had taken his father, when in fact his father had simply taken himself away. Your sister-in-law files the email away, closes that chapter of her life once more, returns to the happiness she found long after she stopped waiting for a dead man to come home. She's the one who has moved on most completely, who has built the most successful life in the aftermath of abandonment disguised as tragedy, perhaps because she had the most practice. 20 years of raising children alone, of recreating herself as a single mother, a widow, and finally as someone's beloved wife again. She, more than any of you, understands that life continues, with or without the people who are supposed to stay, but don't. And you? You live with the knowledge that your brother is both dead and alive, gone but not in the way you thought, lost but by choice rather than fate. You live with the strange reality of grieving someone who still draws breath, who still walks and talks and exists in the world, but is nevertheless gone from your life in all the ways that matter. You live with the complicated emotions of loving someone capable of such cruelty, of missing someone who revealed himself to be a stranger, of mourning a version of your brother that never actually existed, except in the stories you told yourself about who he was, what he valued, what he would never do. The photograph album your mother kept, the one with James's childhood pictures, school portraits, wedding photos, family gatherings, sits on your shelf gathering dust. You haven't opened it since the revelation, can't bear to see the smiling face of a man you now realize you never truly knew. Was he already planning his escape in that Christmas photo where he's holding his infant son? Was he already dreaming of disappearing in that vacation snapshot where he's embracing his wife on a beach? Were all the moments you cherished, all the memories you preserved, tainted by the knowledge of what was to come, by his secret desire to be anywhere else? Anyone else? Does it matter? Does it change the reality of those moments, the genuine connections that might have existed before whatever drove him to such an extreme measure took hold? You don't know. You may never know. There are questions without answers, wounds without perfect healing, stories without satisfying conclusions. This is one of them. A family fractured by one man's desperate choice, trying to reassemble the pieces into something that allows for moving forward. There will never be complete restoration. There will never be a return to innocence, to trust, to the blind faith that the people who love you would never willingly leave you behind. There is only this: the painful process of integration, of finding a way to live with the truth, however ugly, however devastating. In the end, it comes down to a simple, terrible fact. Your brother chose to leave. He chose to let all of you believe he was dead, rather than face whatever demons drove him to such an extreme decision. He chose freedom over family, escape over responsibility, reinvention over repair. And now, 20 years too late, you all have to live with the consequences of that choice, the wasted grief, the unnecessary pain, the lost decades that can never be reclaimed. It's a bitter pill, a painful truth, a reality too harsh to fully accept, but too real to deny. Your brother is alive. He has always been alive, and he never wanted to come back. What do you do with such knowledge? How do you integrate it into your understanding of family, of love, of the bonds that are supposed to hold people together through all of life's storms? There are no easy answers, no clear paths forward. Only the slow, painful process of acceptance, accepting that the brother you thought you knew never existed, that the tragedy you mourned was actually an abandonment, that the past 20 years have been built on a foundation of lies. It's a different kind of grief, more complicated and in some ways more painful than the simple loss you thought you were mourning. But it's real, and perhaps that's the only comfort available, that at least now, finally, you're grieving something true. Would you have searched for him if you had known he wasn't at the bottom of the ocean? Would you have moved heaven and earth to find him, to bring him home, to save him from whatever drove him to such desperate measures? Or would you have respected his choice, however painful, and let him go with the dignity of honesty rather than the fiction of tragedy? These questions have no answers because the choice was never offered. He made the decision for all of you, to disappear completely, to let you believe he was dead, to deny you even the truth of your abandonment. The time for other options, for different choices, is 20 years past. There is only now, only the reality you find yourselves in, only the truth finally exposed after 2 decades in the dark. The revelation has not brought closure. If anything, it has reopened wounds long scabbed over, exposed raw nerves thought to be deadened by time, created new questions where there were once only resigned acceptance. But perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps real healing couldn't begin until the truth was known, however painful that truth might be. Perhaps the closure you thought you had, the acceptance of a tragic, blameless death, was actually a barrier to genuine understanding, to authentic grief, to moving forward with clear eyes rather than comforting fictions. Now, at least, you're dealing with reality. And reality, however harsh, is always preferable to even the most comforting of lies. In time, this too will become part of your family's story. The brother who disappeared, who let you believe he was dead, who reappeared 20 years later to reveal the fiction you had been living. It will be woven into the fabric of your shared history, integrated into the narrative of who you are individually and collectively. It will never be forgotten, never fully accepted, never completely understood. But it will be acknowledged, faced, incorporated into the complex, messy, imperfect reality of family. And perhaps that's all anyone can ask for after 20 years of living a lie. The chance to face the truth and find a way to live with it, to move forward with open eyes and honest hearts into whatever comes next. There's a strange kind of peace in that knowledge, in the end of pretense, in the confrontation with hard truth. No more secrets, no more lies. No more living in the shadow of a fiction so complete it was never questioned. The truth is out now, exposed and undeniable. Your brother is alive. He has always been alive. And whatever happens next, whatever relationships are salvaged or severed, whatever forgiveness is granted or withheld, it will be based on reality rather than fantasy, on clear-eyed choice rather than deception. That, at least, is something real to hold on to in a landscape shifted by revelation, by the earthquake of truth that has forever altered the terrain of your family's existence. If you're watching this video, you've just experienced one of life's most devastating revelations, the discovery that someone you thought was gone forever has actually been alive all along, choosing to stay away. We've walked through the 20-year journey of grief, discovery and confrontation with a truth too painful to fully comprehend. But what would you do if faced with such an impossible situation? Would you confront the person who caused so much unnecessary pain? Would you welcome them back into your life? Or would you decide that some betrayals are simply unforgivable? The choice, like grief itself, is deeply personal. This true story reminds us that sometimes the people we think we know most intimately can harbor secrets we never imagined, that the lines between victim and villain, between grief and betrayal, between tragedy and abandonment, are blurrier than we'd like to believe. That truth, however long buried, eventually finds its way to the surface. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more hidden stories of disappearances, unexpected returns, and the complicated emotions that accompany life's most shocking revelations. And remember, some questions have no perfect answers, some wounds never fully heal, and some truths once revealed can never be unknown again.